I don't know why it said that. Okay, I'm hoping you enjoyed this week, because to be honest, my experience of it was like last summer, I read like 10 books on race theory, including things like So You Want to Talk About Race and How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I realized like these 2 chapters we read are just as good and thorough as those. And that's really what this was about, is like, hey, let's really look at the contextual experience. And there was only a little bit of biblical parallel, but remember where this is going. We're going to conclude this book next week when we talk about womanist God talk and Black liberation theology. So this is all setting the stage for atonement theology, quite honestly, for the language that we need to use. And the author is making sure we don't just jump to that we've built the case for why that looks the way it looks. So I've already overtalked. Let me ask you, not what stood out, what was challenging for you this week? Or was there a turn of phrase that you hadn't encountered before? Maybe you'd heard the concept, but there was a different turn of phrase. Or was there a parallel that really grabbed your attention? Or, as always, was there something that made, like, you kind of bristled and made your hackles stand up in this material? Jane, please.
White racial narcissism.
New word for me too. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was, I found while I was reading this chapter that it reminded me of the difficulty I had reading How to Be an Anti-Racist.
Yeah.
You know, and not only difficult in hearing or seeing the information and the backstory, but the concepts are just, I would find myself going back in How to Be an Anti-Racist and in this chapter and rereading sentences that I had just read or paragraphs and saying, am I sure that says what it says? But the white anti-racist narcissism, racial narcissism, really that has stuck with me and made it, I think what I didn't like or liked, I don't know, what I found interesting is that we hear about white privilege. So it stands to reason that there's a dark side to white privilege. And white privilege doesn't describe everything that Blacks have gone through. But white racial narcissism just kind of sums it up for me.
Thank you. I love that turn of phrase as well. And because it's so, it's actually the most descriptive phrase I think I've read out of any of the books. Like it's, I don't know why no other authors have used that phrase out of the books I've read, but it's very strong.
It is.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Well, I'm behind on my reading, and but I have read. I don't think I'm too far behind y'all, but this book has really made me angry, shocked, amazed, disgusted, and respect and esteem for Black women, you know, has gone through the roof just about.
Yeah.
You know, I have worked with Black people some of my life, and I never wanted to be a racist, so I was always careful in how I worked with them. And I had Black friends, and we'd go out to coffee together and things of that sort. And I look back on that and I'm thinking, oh, those women, I had no idea what they were dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really glad to have the opportunity to read this book and to listen to y'all's discussion, because I'm not caught up with you yet.
Thank you. I'm going to hop in and say, you know, I didn't know why I didn't remember this chapter. It just shows how young and like foolish I was. But chapter 4 really talked about something we did last summer, this idea about how language paints Black as bad and white as good, and how the church is saturated with that language.
Mm-hmm.
and the author names that just explicitly.
Exactly.
And she mentions a couple things that I've listened to. Tim Kavula gave me this really great book to read called Gods of the Upper Air, and it's about how apologists have kind of eased up things, and the book traces things like eugenics and something called anthropometry, like measuring people's head size and stuff. And Dolores did that 20 years ago. You know, like I didn't even remember reading that. And so this book is so relevant and current to be 30 years old. I was amazed and challenged by that chapter. And, you know, what's hard is she's fingered the problem with language, and we're still trying to figure out how we do that. You know, like how do we? I've tried to. We're trying to, you know, when we do Stations of the Cross in the church, because we're still doing that project, we're trying to make sure we've got like dark-skinned folks in there, so that we can just broaden our artistic picture, you know. And you know, use of language is just, it's again, like we need to revise the prayer book. I mean, we just do. I want to walk as a child of the light. I love that song, but maybe we need a sign that says Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
Lila, please.
So, chapter 3, I found this horrifying to read. And Meg, like you, I was very angry. And why didn't I get this in a history book somewhere?
They're not in there.
It's not in there, and it's still not in there. It's all of this information on how the women were abused and the octoroon balls. I mean, this is mortifying. So, yes, so slavery ended with the Emancipation Proclamation, but no, it didn't end. It didn't end. And, you know, I've heard Jimmy Carter talk about this. And given that's the importance of affirmative action.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This, and Meg, like you, I mean, my admiration of Black women has, I mean, it's amazing. They must be made of steel. They
rely so heavily on God. That's what helps them get through.
Have any of you read The Underground Railroad?
I know something about it.
Colson Whitehead.
No.
He is actually one of 4 people who have ever won 2 Pulitzers. And he's the only Black man who's ever won 2, part of that. And his book, he's done Nickel Boys, and he's got another book out that's not quite so heavy, but The Underground Railroad is about, and now it's a series, and it's about the Underground Railroad and a young female and male Black slaves who were trying to escape. But what's interesting is that it is a real railroad.
Okay.
And they stop at stations, and then they have safe houses or safe places to stay. But at each stop, it points out how prejudice appeared in those, even in Philadelphia and the northern states, and the whole time they have someone chasing them. It's a very interesting book. It is. I haven't watched the series yet. It's on Amazon, but I intend to see how they put that into a graphic. I think he was involved.
Mm.
And then he did another book, Nickel Boys, about growing up in, I think, Brooklyn, but I'm not sure. And my sister read that. She said it's pretty heavy.
Thank you. I look forward to reading that, Jane.
Yeah.
I still find it like she continues this theme about how, in the womanist perspective, God is not the God of liberation, but of survival. That's tough.
That is.
You know, I was thinking, people have this idea of, you know, when they die, they want to go to heaven and things of that sort. But I think I think there are going to be a whole lot of surprises, because we will also be held accountable for the things we didn't pay attention to. And so I was just thinking, you know, maybe when you stand before God, it might be very interesting to say, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to do that, or I didn't pay attention to that, or whatever. I don't know. But I just really wonder that, you know, if you look so good as a white person, yet you have racial hatred, but yet you go to church and you believe in God and you try to do what God wants you to do with what you approve of. And you do, you know. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I wish I was a fly on the heavenly wall. So let's see.
You'll get your turn.
That's guaranteed.
I thought,
but I won't be the fly on the wall. I'll be standing before God saying,
"That's right."
Oh, yeah, you know.
I thought it was really interesting how she developed the wilderness as both an antebellum and a postbellum reality, and how she used that image as both positive and both challenging. And I definitely found that a really helpful way to look at wilderness in the Bible, because, you know, so many people are formed in the wilderness and then they sort of come back, like Jesus, the people of Israel. You know, they go out. The word in Hebrew is midbar, and it sometimes gets translated desert, but it really just means like the wild place, which is really interesting, right? Because she talks about how that was used by colonialists or by settlers. Wild was bad and needed to be tamed, and how that got, you know, pushed racially as well. Native Americans were savages, and so it was their duty to like subdue them. And then how that has changed in the 20th century to like, oh, well, wait a minute, like they might have been technologically inferior, but they have this deep spirituality. So we're still living with this weird kind of duality about wild places. And to hear that that's like, you know, a lot of times in youth group, it was like mountaintop experiences is what we talked about. Like, hey, like I'm up on the mountain, and how that's like Whitefoot language, right? Like you go on a Black spiritual retreat and it's like, I've been in the wilderness. You know, like that's really interesting. Or I met the Lord in the desert while I was at youth camp. I mean, that's an interesting, really interesting image.
And I like the concept of both for Black and Native American peoples. Originally, their basic understanding of the wilderness was of renewal and connection with spirit.
Yeah.
The white person that came in and redefined it for them. And yet there was a period where it was both for Black people.
Yeah, and it seems like we've only got back the positive valences, not because we listened to Black or Native Americans, but because we had some enterprising white folk who went ahead and realized what had been there all along. Like John Muir says, like, hey, the wilderness is calling and I must answer. The mountains are calling, however you do that quote, right? We only listened to it when white people said it. That's sort of the tragic bit.
Well, and when the Romantic period, she talks about when the Romantic period and art came, then suddenly, because they were all white artists, people went, oh, maybe it is beautiful because of what they were painting and they were expressing. And
it's interesting to think about that, isn't it? Like Goethe, the German philosopher and poet who went all over the place, like really is one of those first romantics, right, on the continent. And oddly enough, he wasn't saying anything new.
No.
He was saying indigenous speech, but because it came from his white mouth, it was listened to. I know that sounds really whatever, but it seems to be the case.
And I had thought about the same thing that you mentioned, that we use the term mountaintop. Even when you go to Curcio, they talk about having a mountaintop experience. And white people go to the mountaintop and black people go to the wilderness. And I thought, why don't we all go to the same place? I mean, we really are, but well, I like the wilderness better.
Well, I do, because it's more, I just think it's more robust, right? I mean, when you say mountaintop, it's like everything was positive, but I hear this really interesting move in spirituality where like you have a vision and it could be really good, but part of the wilderness is now you struggle to live into it. And that is a struggle.
Well, and if you think biblically, even the people of that time went to the high places to build altars.
Which wasn't always a good thing.
Right.
Yeah. It was interesting to think about how Victorian norms too got got contrasted and then pushed onto Black women, right? And it was a really interesting thing to hear about how white women were like considered to be these like delicate beings, and so Black women could be these more sexualized objects because they looked different, and how that's kind of gone around. And that's one of those really interesting things she raises that I still see relevant. I mean, our curate was here as a female, and somebody said to her, like, I just have a hard time seeing you up there as a woman. And people at the end of church would shake my hand and they would try to give her a hug. And that's weird. I'm talking about men, not women. I told her, you can follow your heart, but I think you can say, look, you don't hug Mike, so you got no business trying to hug me.
Right. I thought it was interesting too that poor white women, and I had never known this, poor white women were the ones who were given the domestic jobs. Everything I've ever seen and read features Black women in that role. But they put the Black women to work out in the fields and doing menial work, and the poor white women were given the better jobs, the domestic jobs.
Yeah, it's interesting. I read a book this past summer about how gynecology advanced in America, and it had to do with preying upon Black women who were considered to like, their children were really valuable because they were going to be born slaves. So they couldn't lose any kids because that was a huge economic loss for slaveholders. But Black women were considered like less sensitive, so they didn't use any anesthetic or anything like that. And they would do these procedures like in the middle of the kitchen floor because it was like they considered it veterinary work, which is dreadful. But what the book did that was interesting is that was a Southern experience. And in New England, it happened to Irish immigrants. And to not real, I have a deep sense of how discriminated against Irish women were, like red-haired Bridget women. I mean, those are the kind of like types that were given, and they were treated similarly. And largely because there just wasn't the same population in the north of Black people. There was a much larger population of Irish immigrants. And that's a part of the story we don't remember either, is how poorly the Irish were treated.
In each wave of immigrant, the most recent were the out group, and so they were the most discriminated against, the most hated, because they were the out group. And that goes back to that discussion we had last year about the need for in-group and out-group to make the in-group feel better and to lift the in-group up.
Yeah, I thought the other thing the author did that was really interesting was positioned Black women in a unique spot in the Black community of having to do the roles of Black men, because Black men were absent for a variety of reasons, but also having to defer and raise up essentially absentee Black men. Now, she talked about the causes of Black men's absence, which typically gets described as like, like lazy or just absentee. And she talked about how that was institutionalized, right? That this absence, but also how Black women started to have power, but they had to use what power they had propping up men, so that essentially Black men's liberation was supported by Black women without also lifting them up. That's really a tough reality. And I don't think she threw stones at all. And she talked about that in the first chapter when she was contrasting like James Baldwin with, Alice Walker. And so that was interesting to return to that. I mean, it's like, it's not a double bind, it's like a triple bind.
And it seems to me like the Black women are still continuing to have to hold the family together, transmit the values, do most of the work, like they talked about in the Black church. Yeah. Black men are the leaders, but women do the organizing and the majority of the work, and are the majority of the parishioners too.
Yeah.
It's an interesting bit, right? I've seen, and this is just anecdotal, so I can't speak statistically, but it's interesting when you hear a mother tell her children, you will listen to your father. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
Yes, I've heard that.
That's a really interesting image though, right? Because it's clear who has the real power, but how they have to use that power.
Yeah. And speaking of influence and power, she also talked about how the women had to be kind of sneaky about it.
Yeah.
More sneaky's not the word she used, but she did say that led to the idea that Black women were devious.
Yeah.
And because they had to be be careful and sneak their influence in. And, I think as white women, the feminism part is that sometimes I was in a group, I think last week, that talked about how we as white women have to be careful how we say things.
Yeah.
Because if we're direct, we're either thought of as pushy, bossy, or are totally discarded in terms of what we say. So it's a Black thing, but it's also a feminine thing.
Yeah, I thought her contrast of like which biblical women speak to whom was very interesting, and how the Virgin Mary is a white image and how Hagar is a Black image. That's tough, and to name the Virgin Mary as this pliant Victorian woman compared to this kind of, wild and discarded Hagar, that was really interesting. I'm afraid we've actually domesticated Mary quite a bit. And I don't know that it has to be either or. Seems like those two images really ought to reform one another. you know, Mary always comes across as very meek and mild and lowly instead of as courageous and like risky, which is a new read for me of her, you know. And I wish Dolores Williams had spoken to like a different way to reinterpret Mary. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I think she's doing that, not explicitly. So I think it's like a false tension between the two figures.
Yeah.
One of the passages that I marked that really hit home for me, this Hagar symbolism provides a historically realistic model of non-middle class Black womanhood. Contrary to Anglo-American ideals about true womanhood, this African-American notion affirms such qualities as defiance, risk-taking, independence, endurance when endurance gives no promise, the stamina to hold things together for the family, even without the help of a mate, the ability in poverty to make a way out of no way, the courage to initiate political action in the public arena, and a close personal relation with God. That sounds pretty darn good to me.
Yeah. So here's my question for you ladies on the screen, and I'm going to ask it and I'm going to be quiet. How does this, what we've read so far, offer to reform the way I preach and the way that we do church at St. Thomas?
That's a good question.
I think you're already doing it, Mike. Mm-hmm. You change language, and I notice every time you do it, and I go, yes, thank you. And I feel very affirmed and free. I don't feel the restrictions that I usually feel in church. So I appreciate what you are doing.
Yes, me too.
I agree, and I like the way you include Hagar and other women of the Bible in the prayers. But perhaps what you would need to do, because we're all white women, what are some of the perspectives of the Black women in the church? I know there's only a few, but what are their perspectives?
I could ask Dee.
She'll give it to you.
She'll give it to me. I feel like she's kind of doing that already. And I'm so grateful for your kind words. And ladies, I do want to make sure you hear, I'm not digging for affirmation. I mean, I really want us to take this book and think about it. And I'm not lamenting the fact that there's only women on the screen with me. Although to me, this is this interesting thing, right? We do these studies and they largely are women. And I'm usually the only man leading a bunch of women. And I'm trying to figure out how we like differentiate that and invite something different. Although if this is who's going to show up, then how do we do something that's like really helpful to women and not just helpful to your male cleric, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
But I really do think we're looking through, I mean, as much as we try not to and try to be balanced, we're looking through a white woman's lens.
And I think that's all right. You know, again, like I don't know that we're going to change our fundamental lens.
No, but if you want perspective on what could you do differently,
ask
someone who is Black or Native American or Latinx. It's
it's a sticky wicket, and we talked about this last summer a little bit, right? Because listen, Dee has Black skin. And if I say, Dee, like, what do Black people want? That's like a really unfair question.
Oh, yeah. No.
I actually find myself frequently like not masculine, which is strange because I am definitely cisgender. Like I am very comfortable in the male body, but I listen to like stereotypical men talk, and I'm like, boy, there must be something wrong with me because I don't even think like that, like let alone talk like that. So it's a weird bit, right? Like I'm no good case study for like American men, and to ask simply like, how do we do this from your perspective without giving them the weight of having to speak for all people. That's tricky stuff, right?
Yes. Do you have a female Black friends?
It's a great question. I'm gonna answer it honestly. I don't have very many friends, period. Friends are hard to come by for me. And I spend most of my time at the church and school. So the friendly relationships I have in general are with parishioners and school families. But at the end of the day, I work here, and we all know that. And so I think the most mature people can navigate that somewhat, but I work here. I don't have a lot of free time in which I'm out and about. And sometimes I've met people, I've become friendly with them, and I just hope they don't start coming to church here, which is really strange, right? But if they do, then that's just another person I'm involved in. And because I spend most of my time at this church and this school, and because there's not very many people of color involved here, I tend to not have close relationships with people of color. I just have to be honest about that. And in my former life, I grew up in a white neighborhood, and so my friends were largely white. I went largely to a white college, and really, this is fairly true, most of our students of color were athletes.
Yeah.
That was how we recruited them. In grad school, I honestly, I didn't spend a lot of time making friends. I spent a lot of time working and studying, and probably that's because I was really insecure. And some of the friends that I made, the friendly relationships I had were with people of color, both Black and white. But I don't think that's unique to me as a clergy person.
No, it's not.
Most clergy struggle with this.
I thought they might be just another, if you did, they might be another resource for even saying, come to one of my services or some of my services and give me input, and they would be a safe place for you to do that.
I think particularly if I knew they were willing to do that. And I try to be wary about like asking Black people to teach me how to be woke, because that just seems really tough. That's
tough.
I'm going to be honest, and forgive me, but I'm going to be honest. Sometimes I meet women who are female clergy, and I'm going to say this and it sounds terrible, but I often feel like I'm ahead on women's issues of many of the women that I know. And I know that's weird because I'm not a woman, so I don't have to live that, and they do.
Yeah.
But like, at least academically, I've like converted in ways some of my peers haven't.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back. What I mean is like, it's a weird situation, right? Where like, again, like I find myself at the top of the food chain, and I like to make advancements, and I really do want to like open my heart, and like just the mechanics of it are really hard.
But I personally don't see what you could change except in as you naturally grow, and I don't see what you could do differently than you do now, because you do reach out to more than I have seen other ministers reach out to.
I think what I wish we could do is strike up some kind of long-term relationship with a historically Black parish. And the benefit is mostly for us, it's not for them. I might have to be honest about that. Like all the books say, look, Black people already know how to navigate the white world. They have to do that. So what's in it for us is that we start to normalize Black friendships. Because if you live in this neighborhood, there's like 3 Black people with houses, and all the other Black people live in this neighborhood live in apartments. I mean, Darlene, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's about right.
I agree. I've watched Richard as he has become more and more involved in the fire department.
Yeah.
And I think there are maybe 2 or 3 Black people who are volunteers, and Richard has an uncanny ability to develop relationships with people across the spectrum, the SES spectrum, and he has become really a good friend to one of the Black firemen, and that's come from working side by side. And it's also come from being open to alternative ways of thinking and talking, and so much so that he has picked up some of the language. and I told him, I love your work there, but you're bringing some of the language home that's a little uncomfortable. Can we look at that? And that was a comfortable and successful intervention there. but what I'm saying is it comes from interaction. It comes from opportunity to interact and work together on projects. And we don't have that in this community. We're a nice community, but we don't really interact that much. We wave as we walk by.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's the way Friendswood is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Is there a historically Black congregation near us? I know Wheeler Avenue, and we had an associate minister who used to preach at Wheeler Avenue once a month, but that was because he marched in the 60s with Dr. King, and it's like we almost need to go down as a church to a Black Lives Matter or some kind of and for that matter, we should go down and support, if we believe in it, support the people who are Jewish or Japanese or Asian Pacific, as they provide peaceful demonstrations against the violence towards them now. I think but back then there was a bigger platform and people had a different mindset. And so he got into that, and his relationship with Wheeler Avenue grew.
Yeah, I had this like real stunning moment with Johnny Ward, the guy who was incarcerated and earned his master's degree. And on the call, I said, what can we do to like help the system? And his answer was, you can't do anything. you don't have power. You need like senators to like change this. And that's probably the answer to this a little bit in terms of like large picture change. I'm trying to stay mindful that there's opportunities like somebody at St. James downtown, which is a historically Black parish in Houston, is trying to put together a Juneteenth bike ride to Galveston, in which you do like significant places in Galveston that do with racial justice. And we talked, and she said, hey, could St. Thomas be a staging point for bike riders between Houston and Galveston in case people didn't want to ride the whole way? And I was like, yeah, of course, I'm not sure that it would be beneficial, but of course. And I was talking to Lillian Hyde, who was involved here in the parish through her husband, and she's at Trinity in Galveston, and St. Vincent's House is very involved with Trinity. And we were talking about this idea of maybe like trying to get families on the island to do like lunch for people, like soul food lunch, as a way of creating employment for them. And, like that's something we could very sporadically support, but it's just so hard in our immediate community to think about like, what do we do without being the great white hope, right? Because nobody needs that. And maybe part of it is like individual conversion, but I'd like to see more than that. It's so hard, it's like, and as a man particularly, and like with an engineering brain, like I want something I can do. Like I want concrete steps that are going to work so I can check off, like I did that thing and it worked. And like part of what's whirling around here is that's probably not going to happen.
There is an AME church in the Clear Lake area that we might, possibly ask them if we could be partners in their project.
Do you have an in with them at all? Like, do you know anybody there?
I used to a long time ago. but I don't now, not for years.
This is one of the hard things I've come across with cold calls. And this happened like in maybe 2019, tail of 2018. We asked the Islamic school, there's an Islamic school up by Ellington that does like elementary through high school. And I actually have a somewhat in with them, and that my wife knows a parent there. And we emailed the headmaster and said, like, hey, could we set up like a pen pal program between our students and yours? Didn't get an answer. And I think probably because it's like, again, what's in it for us? What's in it for our kids? Like, they already know how to handle all you Christian folk, like what's in it for our kids, right? Is that they learn like, oh, these are human beings, right? That just have different ways of orienting their calendar than we do. And that's really great for our kids to get that. But I don't know that their kids get a whole lot out of it. So that's part of the deal, right? Like, if I knew the head of school, I could call them, but I don't. And so getting like calls returned, which I've tried to do, it's difficult. And I don't blame them. I got to tell you, this is a weird thing that happens as a pastor. Like, I'll get people who call me and they want me to do dumb stuff. To be honest, they want to sell me a website, or like, they've got this great idea that is not a great idea. And when I call them and say no, they're like, thanks for calling me back. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Like, nobody calls us back. Clergy don't return calls. They don't return emails. And I guess that's like endemic. So these are, I can't even get white folk to return my calls or emails. The churches in this neighborhood, I've asked if we can get together. They don't even respond. So I gave up. Like, I quit.
Yeah.
I'm not going to chase people around. I'm not a chaser.
So, Mike, I think you go through the women.
Well, that's an interesting idea.
It's the women that build collaborations.
But the
right?
hard part about it, right, is still even like, and look, I'm not throwing anybody under the bus here, but at the 3 other churches in Nassau Bay, it might be the women who build collaboration, but it's still a patriarchal system, and their male leaders wield the power and can say no or not interested.
So, put them in that position where they have to say no. And also, Mike Brady and St. Augustine.
Yeah.
Galveston.
Right.
Yeah. Black church. Wonderful history. That church has a rich history. Founded by sailors. No? What's going on down there?
I'm listening. I'm listening.
Yeah.
My mind always races to, like, other than a phone call where we say, like, hey, it'd be great to work out. Like, what does it look like? What does a meaningful partnership look like? Or what does meaningful support look like? Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And, like, I've got some Black clergy peers that I've had some good conversations with, and maybe part of it is saying, listen, this can sound terrible, but like, we just haven't had a Black face in the pulpit here for a long, long time. And that's the real reason I'm calling you. Would you show up in our pulpit? Because we'd love to hear what you have to say, whether it's social justice or not. Our people need to see a Black face in the pulpit. And you have that face. I know that's a little bit unfair, but I feel like that's safer to ask an Episcopal clergy person in the diocese than it is somebody else. You know what I mean? And maybe I need to do that.
Who is the female, the Black clergy person? Her husband is the treasurer at Trinity, and I think it's St. Elizabeth's. Is that where she is? She's been there for years. It's an old church, small.
I don't know. See, the diocese is so big, you probably know more clergy than I do, Jane.
Well, this is in Houston. I'll find out her name, because having a Black female clergy person.
Yeah.
And she preaches sometimes when Steve is gone.
Okay.
At Lord
Well,
of the Streets.
We've got some really talented Black ladies in the diocese. And one of the people who I happen to love is Francine Young, who directs like the discernment process. And she used to be with Bank of America, and she was a high-level executive. And maybe I could just say, hey, Francine, I don't want to come across the wrong way, but like we think it'd be really beneficial for our people to have some ground level engagement. And we're really happy to do things like clergy swaps, or even to pay supply people while I'm here, so that we can have just some more exposure. And like, what do you think? Is that a terrible idea? Or do you have like other things you think we could do?
I like that idea.
I like it too. And it doesn't have to be constant or whatever, but I think if we're thoughtful, which I know that you would be thoughtful about who's selected and how often they come, but I think that would be.
It's one of the worst things about all of this, right? Is that, and this is so true about women in ministry, but especially Black women in ministry, you can't put a mediocre person up in front. They have to be an A+ person. Otherwise, you're going to confirm everybody's stereotype, and how unfair that is. Because most of us men are frankly like less than mediocre.
Are you saying it's a low bar, Mike?
Lila, you know full well it's a really low bar.
Mike, I love you, Mike.
Well, I'm grateful. And that's reciprocal. And no matter what I think about what I do, it's really important to remember it's a really low bar for me for lots of reasons.
Except for that Mick Jagger lip thing. Woohoo.
I can't believe you're still on that. Think of Gene Simmons instead. There you go.
No, not any better. It's the big.
Longer, thinner.
Awful.
More face paint.
Yeah, no, thanks. Things stick in my head. I think it's part of mental illness.
Instead of putting yourself down, I think it could be part of mental acuity.
That's right.
Right. Yeah.
My goodness, I love that.
You need to tell your evil twin allele, right? That listen, that's a good part of you. It's meant for good. So you and allele need to make friends on that.
I love that assignment, Mike, and I'll report back.
It's a good assignment. Make friends with your shadow side. That's the bottom line. Yep. Hey, so I've got maybe one last really good image to tell you that this made me think about, and forgive me because it's very white and European. But in the stories of like St. George and the dragon, like the dragon is this terrible symbol of evil, in how in the Far East, dragons are neither good nor evil. Like they just are powerful beings that can be really, really helpful. And what's interesting to think, right, is how Europeans took the dragon, which was not their thing, it was an Asian thing, and they converted it to a monster instead of seeing the potential for friendship in it. And there's a tale of St. George, right, where St. George catches that dragon who's wreaking havoc and takes it to town on a chain. And tells the people, we're not doing anything with this dragon until you get baptized and convert, because if you don't change your ways, there'll just be another dragon that comes along. And in some versions of the story, the people convert and the dragon just disappears. And there's no slaying of the dragon. But I'd like to imagine another one where the people convert and like the dragon lives among them. And that's like Francis and the wolf, right? The wolf and the people, they mutually convert and the wolf lives there. And, like rewriting some of our legends seems like a basic assignment that we get. Since it's made up, who cares if you get it right? It's all made up anyway. So just rewrite the story so that it is true. I look forward to our last section with this book, and I know I know it's a tall order. We're doing 3 chapters next time. I know that. But that's what we're going to do. And I think particularly because we've been talking about theologies of the cross, and I told you that's going to happen. It's going to happen in the next 3 chapters when we talk about what the cross means for Black women. So I hope you'll enjoy that. And reminder, where we're going next is the Native American book, The Four Vision Quests of Jesus. Lila, I need that. Well, I need to know if you're going to get it back or I need to get another one. I'm okay either way.
No,
I don't mind getting one for me. You can keep that one if you want.
Actually, I can get one for you and just have it sent to the church.
If that's what you want to do, it's great because I need to read it again. I love that book. I learned so much about Native American culture. So I hope you'll enjoy it as well if you choose to do that.
I might bring it by and get myself an electronic version.
Whatever you like to do. And again, I don't mind to order one either. So just let me know.
No, I'll bring you this one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ladies, I'm always grateful for your thoughtfulness and your time. And I'll see you next week when we finish this.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.